Okay, so like everyone remembers that SpaceX Starship test flight,
Yeah.
right? The one that kind of went boom.
Yeah, made big headlines.
But for today's deep dive, we're not going to just focus on the failed launch itself. We're going further. We're going to look at what happened afterwards, like the debris field and all that.
Yeah, we're talking about the pieces that landed on the Turks and Caicos Islands
Exactly.
and what it all means for space travel in the future.
Right, because it's one thing to kind of like, watch these launches and celebrate the successes, but then what happens when things go wrong?
Right.
And where does that debris end up?
It's kind of like, it's almost like a domino effect in a way.
It is.
It starts thousands of feet above the Earth, launch fails, and then it ends up with real consequences for us here on the ground.
Absolutely.
And it brings up a lot of new questions about, the way we approach space exploration.
Yeah, so let's set the scene a little bit. We've got
Sure.
Starship, which is this just enormous rocket, right?
Right.
It's over 400 feet tall. It's the most powerful rocket that has ever been built.
Mm-hmm.
It's meant to be our ride back to the moon with the Artemis III mission in 2027.
Yeah, big plans for Starship.
Big plans, maybe even Mars someday.
Yeah, Mars eventually.
But, on this particular test flight, things went wrong about 9 minutes in.
Yeah, lost contact, basically.
Yeah.
The rocket broke apart and debris was scattered over a huge, wide area.
Yeah, and some of that debris landed on the Turks and Caicos Islands.
Which, it is not ideal.
No, not ideal at all.
Yeah.
And there are all these reports of like glowing debris
That was one of these eyewitness accounts, yes.
streaking across the sky.
Pretty wild.
So just imagine for a minute, you're Ray Garcia, who's a tennis instructor on the islands, right?
Yeah.
You're just going about your day, and then all of a sudden you're seeing this. You're hearing and feeling these
Yeah.
explosions.
Yeah, it must have been terrifying.
Pretty wild.
Really brings home the point that space travel, for all the advances we've made, it still has risks. And not just for the astronauts on board, but like potentially people on the ground too.
Right.
You know,
It wasn't just about the spectacle either. I mean, like, there were actual concerns about the debris itself.
oh yeah, for sure.
Because the government, they issued these warnings telling people to avoid it, don't touch it.
Don't touch it, stay away.
Because, it could be hazardous. It could have chemicals, different materials. We don't know.
Who knows what's in that stuff?
Right.
Yeah.
And they even asked people to report any findings with pictures. It's almost like this very high-stakes scavenger hunt.
Right, a little bit.
But it gets more complicated when you consider, like, who is responsible for the debris.
Well, and that's where the legal stuff comes in, right?
Yeah,
In this case, SpaceX owns it.
right.
And they've been working with partners in the UK to collect it, make sure it's safe.
Right.
They even had to set up a debris response area.
Yeah.
And it's disrupted air travel with groundings and diversions.
Which is a huge undertaking, logistically, financially, all of that. But it begs the question, what happens when space travel is even more frequent in the future?
Yeah, and with more players involved, not just SpaceX.
Right.
This event really brings to light the growing concern around space debris in general.
It does.
Not just from this one launch, but the long-term implications. Over time, how much is going to be up there.
Right. And I think right now, like a lot of the international agreements and stuff, they focus on preventing collisions in orbit.
Right, keeping things safe up there.
But what about when the debris re-enters the atmosphere?
Yeah, that's the tricky part.
Like, is this event going to push for new regulations or technologies?
It could.
Like controlled re-entry and stuff?
Especially with the rise of commercial spaceflight and everything. It's a whole new ballgame.
It makes you think, like, what if those pieces had landed on a city instead of this relatively unpopulated island chain?
Yeah, that's a whole other can of worms.
All right.
Like a huge legal and ethical minefield.
It is.
Especially as companies like SpaceX and Blue Origin, they're ramping up their launch schedules.
They are.
So we might need to seriously rethink international space law.
Yeah.
And come up with clear liability frameworks to deal with the consequences of, space debris.
So it's not just about celebrating the successes of space exploration,
No.
but also kind of grappling with the side effects.
The messy side effects.
Yeah.
Exactly. Finding that balance, right?
Right.
The excitement of pushing those boundaries can't overshadow, the responsibility we have
Right.
to protect our planet.
Yeah,
And let's face it, ourselves.
absolutely.
So yeah, this deep dive, it gives you the key pieces of the puzzle, but here's something to think about.
Okay.
What solutions can we come up with to manage all this space debris before it truly becomes an out-of-this-world problem?
Right.
That's something I'm really thinking about.
Yeah,
That's a big one.
definitely a big one. Thanks for listening, everybody.
See ya!